Look at a dollar bill. Not the front, the back, the left side. There's a pyramid with no capstone, and floating above it, an eye inside a triangle. Below the pyramid, Latin words that most Americans have never bothered to translate. Novus Ordo Seclorum, New World Order. At least, that's what the internet will tell you it means. Search it. You'll find the claim repeated on 10,000 websites, in 100 documentaries, in comment sections that stretch for miles. The eye watches everything. The pyramid represents the hierarchy. The Latin is the mission statement. And it's been sitting on every dollar in your wallet since 1935, hiding in plain sight. If you search Illuminati on YouTube, you'll find videos with 100 million views. Celebrities throwing up triangle hand signs at concerts. Pop stars with one eye covered in promotional photos. Leaked footage of rituals in the California redwoods. Anonymous accounts connecting CEOs, presidents, and musicians to a single symbol, a single organization, a single word. Illuminati. The story goes like this. A secret society, centuries old, embedded in every government, every corporation, every awards show green room on the planet. They started revolutions. They crashed economies. They put their symbols on the money and dared you to notice. They are the reason the world doesn't make sense, or, depending on who you ask, the reason it makes too much sense. Nothing is an accident. Everything is designed. And if you can just find the pattern, you can see who's pulling the strings. It's a hell of a story. Here's the problem. Almost none of it is true. The actual Illuminati was founded on May 1st, 1776. Not in a secret underground chamber, not in a cathedral, not in a castle. In a university, by a professor. He was 28 years old. He had 4 students with him. They met in a classroom in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, a town most people couldn't find on a map. They called themselves the Order of Perfectibilists. They thought that was a good name. They changed it later. At their peak, they had roughly 2,000 members. They existed for 9 years. In that time, they overthrew no governments. They replaced no religions. They crashed no economies. They were shut down by the local authorities. Their documents were seized and published, every last page. And their founder spent the last 45 years of his life in exile in a small German town, writing philosophical essays that almost no one read. He died in 1830. The order had been dead for decades. Every internal document the Illuminati ever produced is publicly available. Their secret codes, their membership lists, their private letters complaining about each other's laziness. You can read them. Almost nobody does. So here's the question this video is going to answer. How did a failed student club from a Bavarian university become the most famous conspiracy theory in human history? How did an organization that accomplished nothing become the explanation for everything? And what does it tell us about ourselves that we needed them to exist long after they were gone? To understand that, we need to go back to the man who started it all, in a town called Ingolstadt, in a country that was terrified of ideas. The Jesuits raised Adam Weishaupt. That is the first thing to understand about everything that came after. His father, Johann Georg Weishaupt, was a professor of law at the University of Ingolstadt, a small conservative institution in the heart of Catholic Bavaria. When Johann Georg died, Adam was a child. His godfather, Baron Johann Adam von Ickstadt, took over his education. Ickstadt was an Enlightenment sympathizer, a rationalist who had quietly pushed back against the Jesuits' stranglehold on Bavarian academia for years. But Ickstadt could only do so much. The boy still attended Jesuit schools. He still learned under Jesuit teachers. He absorbed their methods, their discipline, their hierarchical thinking, their talent for organizing men into structures of obedience, the way a child absorbs anything, completely, and without the critical distance that might have let him see what he was becoming. Ingolstadt in the mid-18th century was not a backwater, but it wasn't Paris or London either. It was a university town in a state where the Catholic Church exerted enormous influence over education, publishing, and public life. The Jesuits had been the dominant intellectual force in Bavaria for generations. They controlled the university curriculum. They decided which books were acceptable and which were dangerous. They shaped the careers of anyone who wanted to teach, publish, or hold public office. Even after Pope Clement XIV formally dissolved the Jesuit order in 1773, their networks remained embedded in Bavarian institutions like roots under pavement, invisible on the surface, structurally intact underneath. Weishaupt moved through this system and excelled. He was brilliant, ambitious, and impatient. By the age of 20, he was already teaching at Ingolstadt. By 25, he held the chair of canon law, the study of church rules and regulations. And here was the detail that mattered. He was the first person in over a century to hold that position who was not himself a Jesuit. The Jesuits noticed. They had trained him. They had educated him. And now he occupied a chair they considered theirs. In a university they considered theirs. In a faculty they had controlled for longer than anyone alive could remember. Weishaupt was an interloper in a world that had never had one. He knew their methods from the inside. He had learned how the Jesuits built loyalty, how they compartmentalized information, how they used hierarchy to control behavior without controlling belief. He understood the machinery, and he had decided he didn't like what it produced. He was 28 years old, surrounded by men who resented his appointment, teaching in a system he wanted to dismantle, in a country where the wrong book on your shelf could end your career. He needed allies. He needed a structure. He needed something the Jesuits couldn't see, couldn't join, and couldn't stop. He needed a secret society of his own. Somewhere in his 20s, Weishaupt started reading books that could have gotten him fired. Voltaire, Rousseau, Baron de Holbach, the French philosophers who argued that reason, not scripture, should govern human affairs. That superstition was the enemy. That monarchs answered to the people they ruled, not to God. These ideas were circulating freely in Paris and London. In Bavaria, they were contraband. Not literally banned in every case, but a professor who taught them openly, particularly one who already occupied a chair the Jesuits wanted back, was painting a target on his own career. Weishaupt read them anyway, and the more he read, the wider the gap between his intellectual life and his professional reality became. He spent his days teaching canon law, the church's internal legal system, and his evenings absorbing philosophy that treated the church as an obstacle to human progress. He taught in a university where the curriculum was still shaped by men whose order had been formally dissolved, but whose influence hadn't budged. He lived in a state where an Enlightenment thinker who stayed quiet could survive, but one who organized could not. The problem was practical. Weishaupt didn't need more ideas. He needed a way to spread them. He needed a network of like-minded people, positioned in universities and government offices and churches, who could gradually shift the institutions from within. A slow infiltration. He never advocated revolution. Change the people inside the system, and the system changes itself. He looked at Freemasonry first. The lodges already existed across Europe. They had infrastructure, meeting halls, initiation rituals, a culture of secrecy. Freemasons included aristocrats, intellectuals, and government officials. Exactly the social strata Weishaupt wanted to reach. But when he investigated, he found two problems. The first was cost. Masonic membership required dues, regalia, and social standing that a young professor on an academic salary couldn't easily afford. The second was substance. Freemasonry, as Weishaupt saw it, was obsessed with ritual, with mystical symbolism, with graded systems of esoteric knowledge that he considered intellectual decoration. He didn't want symbolism. He wanted something that would actually change how people thought. So he decided to build it from scratch. On that night, there were 5 of them. Weishaupt had invited 4 of his law students to a room at the University of Ingolstadt. No ceremony, no torches, no hooded robes, just a professor and 4 young men who thought they could change the world by meeting in secret. They named the organization the Order of Perfectibilists, the Bund der Perfektibilisten, a name so clunky they would abandon it within a year in favor of something that sounded like it belonged to a different century. The Order of the Illuminati, the Illuminaten Orden, the Enlightened Ones. The date, May 1st, 1776, would later become the source of 1,000 conspiracy theories, most of which ignored the fact that nothing particularly conspiratorial happened that evening. Weishaupt outlined goals. They were ambitious, abstract, and entirely characteristic of a young professor who had read too much philosophy and spoken to too few politicians. The order would oppose superstition. It would combat obscurantism, the deliberate restriction of knowledge by authorities. It would resist religious interference in public life and fight abuses of state power. It would achieve these goals through a secret network of members who would gradually infiltrate existing institutions, governments, universities, churches, and shift them from within. The method was specific. Recruitment would be selective. Members would be educated in stages, each stage revealing more of the order's true purpose. Obedience to superiors would be absolute. Information would flow upward, never downward. Lower-ranking members would not know who led the levels above them. The structure was cellular, compartmentalized, and designed to survive the exposure of any single part. In other words, it was a Jesuit system. Weishaupt had spent his entire life inside the Jesuit machine. He had learned how they built networks of obedience, how they used education as a tool for institutional control, how they created loyalty structures that survived the formal dissolution of their order. He despised what the Jesuits stood for, their dogmatism, their hostility to new ideas, their grip on Bavarian society. And when it came time to build the instrument that would destroy their influence, he reached for the only organizational blueprint he knew. He copied them. The order that was founded to fight hierarchical, secretive, obedience-based institutional control was itself hierarchical, secretive, and demanded unconditional obedience. The man who wanted to free Bavarian universities from the Jesuits had built a Jesuit system with different content and the same architecture. This contradiction would define the Illuminati for the rest of their short existence, and it would haunt Weishaupt long after the order was dead. But on May 1st, 1776, none of that mattered yet. 5 men in a university room had decided to change Europe. They had a name, a set of principles, and no idea what they were starting. Weishaupt chose his own code name first. He called himself Spartacus. The choice was deliberate. Spartacus was not a philosopher or a saint. He was a Thracian gladiator who led the largest slave revolt in the history of the Roman Republic. 70,000 men against the most powerful military on earth. He lost. Rome crucified 6,000 of his followers along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road from Capua to the city gates. But the rebellion itself had been the point. One man who refused to accept the system he'd been born into, who organized the people around him in secret, and who fought the most powerful institution of his age. Weishaupt saw himself in that story. A professor in a provincial town, surrounded by an institution he despised, organizing in secret against the most powerful force in Bavarian society. Whether the comparison was grandiose or prophetic depended on who was listening. Every member would follow his example. Upon joining the order, each man abandoned his legal name and adopted a pseudonym drawn from classical antiquity. The reasoning was operational. If a letter was intercepted, the authorities would find communications between Spartacus and Ajax and Tamerlane, names that pointed nowhere. But the effect was psychological. Inside the order, you were no longer a Bavarian civil servant or a university lecturer. You were a figure from history. You had been renamed, and with the name came a new identity, one that existed only within the organization's walls. The geography followed. Every city the Order operated in was given a classical code name. Ingolstadt, the town where everything started, became Eleusis, after the Greek site of the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most sacred initiation rite in the ancient world. Munich became Athens. Vienna became Rome. Bavaria itself was reimagined as a map of the classical Mediterranean. A member reading the Order's correspondence would navigate a world that had nothing to do with the German states and everything to do with a mythologized past. Then, the calendar. The Illuminati adopted a modified Persian calendar, a system no one outside the Order would recognize. Dates in internal correspondence didn't match any calendar in use in Europe. Combined with the cipher they developed for written communications, the result was a closed information system. Letters between members were written in code, addressed between pseudonyms, referencing cities that didn't exist on any real map, dated on a calendar no government used. It was, in every practical sense, a parallel world. And Weishaupt had built it that way on purpose. The renamed cities and the invented calendar weren't eccentricities, they were architecture. Every layer of fiction between the Order and reality was a layer of protection. But there was a cost. Members who spent months or years inside this system began to inhabit it. The parallel world became their real one. The pseudonyms became more familiar than their given names. The classical geography replaced the actual geography of their daily lives. The Illuminati, in its first years, was less a political conspiracy and more a private universe, a place where a small group of men could be the people they believed Bavarian society would never let them become. We know what Adam Weishaupt was like because his private letters survive, and private letters do not flatter the people who write them. In his correspondence with other members of the Order, letters he never expected anyone outside the organization to read, Weishaupt comes across as a man at war with his own creation. He was intelligent, and he knew it, and he made sure everyone around him knew it too. He issued instructions with the tone of a man who assumed his subordinates were incapable of independent thought. When members failed to recruit quickly enough, he accused them of laziness. When they questioned his authority, he accused them of disloyalty. When they suggested alternative approaches, he dismissed them. When they carried out his instructions and the results were poor, he blamed their execution. He was 28 years old. He had never left Bavaria. He had no experience of politics outside the faculty lounge of a single university. He was running an organization that he intended to reshape European governance, and his management style was that of a frustrated department head who couldn't understand why his teaching assistants kept missing deadlines. The letters reveal something else too. Underneath the arrogance, Weishaupt was anxious. He worried constantly about informers. He suspected members of divided loyalties. He demanded detailed reports on new recruits' personal lives and then fretted about whether the information was accurate. He wanted total control, and total control is impossible in any organization, let alone a secret one operating under a hostile government. The gap between what he wanted the Illuminati to be and what it actually was, a small group of educated men exchanging letters in code, consumed him. This is the man the conspiracy theories would later transform into a mastermind. A professor in his 20s, in a provincial Bavarian town, writing angry letters to associates who weren't recruiting fast enough, complaining about their spelling, questioning their commitment, and dreaming of an Enlightenment revolution he had no realistic means of delivering. The documents survive. Anyone can read them. The man they describe is fascinating, sympathetic, and deeply human. He is not the architect of a global conspiracy. He is a young intellectual who built something bigger than he could manage, and was about to discover what happened when someone else showed up who actually could. Before a new member learned a single secret, the Order learned everything about him. The process began at the first degree, novice. A prospective recruit was told almost nothing about the organization he was joining, not its leadership, not its goals. What he received instead was a questionnaire, and the questionnaire was the point. He was asked to provide a complete catalogue of the books he owned. He was asked to list his closest friends and professional contacts. He was asked to name his enemies. He was asked to describe his own weaknesses, moral, intellectual, financial. He was asked to identify which aspects of his personality he considered flaws and which he considered strengths. He was asked to pledge that in any conflict between his personal interests and the interests of the order came first. There was no ceremony, no robes, no oaths by candlelight. Just a document that, once completed, gave the organization a comprehensive profile of the person filling it out, his social network, his intellectual leanings, his vulnerabilities, and his own assessment of where he could be pressured. The novice was, without quite realizing it, building a dossier on himself. This information flowed upward. The recruit's answers were collected by his immediate superior and passed to the level above. The recruit never saw who received the information. He never learned how it was used. The system was designed so that knowledge always traveled in one direction, from the bottom to the top, and never back down. A novice knew nothing about the Minerval above him. A Minerval knew nothing about the illuminated Minerval above her. Each degree existed inside a sealed compartment, visible only to those who had already passed through it. The logic was elegant. A member who didn't know the structure couldn't betray it. If a novice was arrested or interrogated, he could reveal only his own questionnaire answers and the name of the person who had recruited him. He couldn't describe the organization's leadership or its operations, because no one had told him. The Order's security was built into its architecture. You couldn't leak what you didn't know. But the design had a second function that Weishaupt understood, and his recruits usually did not. The questionnaire wasn't just an intake form. It was a lever. A member who had disclosed his weaknesses and his enemies to an organization he couldn't see had handed over the tools of his own control. If he later became disloyal or inconvenient, the information he had voluntarily provided could be used against him. The self-dossier was both a screening process and an insurance policy. The three original degrees, novice, Minerval, illuminated Minerval, were simple. They lacked the theatrical rituals and elaborate symbolism that Freemasonry offered. Weishaupt had rejected Masonic mysticism, and in its place he had built something more functional and, in its own way, more unsettling. A system that turned self-disclosure into organizational power. Every member who walked in thinking he was joining a brotherhood of enlightened freethinkers was, from his first interaction with the Order, teaching it exactly how to manage him. The image that billions of people associate with the Illuminati, the eye inside a triangle, was never used by them. Their actual symbol was an owl. Specifically, it was the owl of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom, strategy, and war. The owl appeared on official Illuminati documents and served as the emblem of the Order's core degree, the Minerval, the rank where a recruit stopped being a probationer and became a participant. Almost nobody alive today could identify it. The symbol the Illuminati actually chose for themselves has been completely eclipsed by one they had nothing to do with. But the ceremony that accompanied the Minerval degree, that survived in the historical record, and it is worth describing in full, because it reveals exactly what kind of organization Weishaupt was building. The candidate was brought to a designated meeting place. He was led into a small preparation room, dark, windowless, or with sealed windows, and left there alone for 10 to 15 minutes. No explanation, no company, just silence and darkness, and the understanding that something was about to happen that he could not control. When the door opened, he was taken into a second room, the ceremonial space. The windows were sealed. 3 oil lamps provided the only light, 1 fitted with white glass, 2 with yellow. The light would have been uneven, slightly golden, enough to see faces, but not details. At the far end of the room, A green screen concealed the presiding superior, the highest-ranking member present. The candidate could hear the superior's voice, but could not see his face. The oath came next. The candidate pledged eternal silence about everything he saw and heard within the order. He pledged loyalty to the organization and its leadership. He pledged blind obedience, not partial, not conditional, but absolute. He accepted, in advance, any punishment the order might impose if he broke the oath. He was given a secret passphrase that granted him entry to future Minerval assemblies. The members already present wore their order jewels, though what these looked like has been described only in fragments. That was it. No blood oaths, no burning effigies. The ceremony was austere, deliberately controlled, and designed to do one thing: make the moment feel irreversible. The darkness, the waiting, the unseen voice behind the screen, the absolute language of the oath, all of it served to create the psychological impression that the candidate had crossed a threshold he could not uncross. He had entered a structure he could not fully see, sworn himself to leaders he could not fully identify, and accepted consequences he could not fully know. The novice questionnaire had been rational. The Minerval initiation was emotional. Together, they formed a two-stage lock. The first captured the recruit's information. The second captured his commitment. Weishaupt understood that data alone wouldn't hold a man inside a secret society. He also needed the man to feel bound, to feel that leaving would cost something he couldn't articulate. The Owl of Minerva watched over all of it, a symbol of wisdom, chosen by a professor who believed that knowledge, properly organized, properly controlled, was the most powerful force in the world. The fact that this owl has been completely forgotten, replaced in the public imagination by a symbol the Illuminati never used, is itself a story, one that comes later. The original 3 degrees worked for a small group. They would never work for an empire. By 1780, the order had grown beyond what Weishaupt's initial design could manage, and a new architect had arrived. A man whose biography belongs later in this story, but whose engineering belongs here. His name was Adolf von Knege, and he took the Illuminati's modest 3-tier structure and rebuilt it into something far more ambitious. A graduated system of degrees, organized into 3 classes, stretching from the lowest probationer to a rank its own designers may never have fully defined. The first class was called the nursery. It contained the degrees a recruit would pass through in his early years: Novitiate, Minerval, and Illuminatus Minor. These were the gates, the stages where a member proved his loyalty, submitted his personal information, and demonstrated that he could follow instructions without asking too many questions about where those instructions originated. The second class was borrowed. 5 degrees: apprentice, companion, master, Scottish novice, and Scottish knight, were adapted directly from Freemasonry. This was a strategic decision. Knege understood that the Illuminati needed to operate inside the Masonic world. Many of its recruits were already Freemasons, and the Masonic degrees gave the order's structure a familiar shape that existing lodge members would recognize. A Freemason entering the Illuminati found a hierarchy he already understood. The same titles, the same progression. What he didn't realize was that the Illuminati's version of those degrees served an entirely different purpose. Masonic degrees led to brotherhood. Illuminati degrees led to obedience. Then came the third class, the mysteries. This was where the system became strange. The lesser mysteries contained 2 degrees, priest and prince, that granted access to the order's inner philosophical teachings and its decision-making councils. Members who reached this level understood the organization's actual goals and participated in directing its operations. The greater mysteries sat above everything. 2 final degrees, mage and king, represented the theoretical apex of the entire system. The candidate who reached these heights would, in principle, possess complete knowledge of the order's purpose and complete authority over its operations. There was one problem. The rituals and doctrines for the greater mysteries may never have been fully written. The evidence is incomplete, but what survives suggests that the highest levels of the Illuminati existed as architecture without content, a staircase that led to rooms that had never been furnished. Weishaupt and Knege designed the system faster than they could fill it. The blueprint outran the reality. This matters because of what it reveals about the organization. The Illuminati's 13-degree system was aspirational at its upper reaches. It described a perfect hierarchy that its founders were still trying to build when the order collapsed. Members in the lower degrees assumed that the levels above them contained profound secrets and powerful leaders. In many cases, those levels contained unfinished documents and arguments between two men who couldn't agree on what the order was supposed to become. The machine was impressive on paper. Whether it ever fully functioned is a question the historical record cannot definitively answer. Everyone in the Illuminati watched everyone else. This was by design. From the moment a member entered the order, he was expected to observe the people around him, including other members, and report what he saw. Each Minerval was assigned to monitor the behavior of the novices beneath him. Each illuminated Minerval observed the Minervals. The chain of observation extended upward through the degree system, and at every level, the instruction was the same. Write down what you see and send it to the person above you. Do not discuss what you observe with the person you are observing. Do not compare notes with other observers. Report upward and only upward. The information that a novice had provided during his intake, his books, his self-identified weaknesses, now gained a second life. His superiors could check the dossier he had written on himself against the reports being filed about him by his peers. If a member claimed to have no enemies, but 3 separate observers reported ongoing disputes with colleagues, the discrepancy would be noted. If a member listed certain books on his questionnaire but was seen reading others, the inconsistency was flagged. The system created an environment where dishonesty was almost impossible to sustain, because no member knew who was watching him, and the organization already had his own words to measure him against. The result was a culture of permanent visibility. A member could not relax inside the order because there was no part of the order that was off the record. Social interactions between members were observed. Private opinions shared at meetings were transcribed and forwarded. Friendships within the organization functioned simultaneously as genuine relationships and as intelligence-gathering operations. There was no boundary between what a member said as a friend and what was reported about him as a subject. Weishaupt had a word for what this process was supposed to achieve. He called it illumination. The concept was revealing. To be illuminated, in Weishaupt's framework, was to become transparent, to have no part of yourself hidden from the organization. A fully illuminated member was someone who had been seen completely, his habits observed, his opinions catalogued, his relationships mapped, his contradictions identified. Illumination was the process by which the private self was dissolved into the organizational record. What remained was a member whose interior life was no longer entirely his own. Whether Weishaupt recognized the irony is unclear. An order founded to combat institutional control over the individual had built the most thorough system of individual control any of its members had ever encountered. The Jesuits had demanded obedience to doctrine. The Bavarian government had demanded obedience to the law. The Illuminati demanded something more intimate, obedience to transparency itself. Every secret you had once owned now belonged to an organization that kept secrets professionally. The effect on membership was predictable. Some men thrived in the environment, the ambitious ones, the ones who saw the surveillance apparatus as a tool they could use rather than one that was being used on them. Others grew uneasy. The men who had joined expecting a brotherhood of intellectual equals found instead an organization that knew them better than their own families did, and that showed no indication of ever forgetting what it had learned. Take a letter written by one Illuminati member to another in 1783 and try to read it. You will fail. Every identifying feature, the names, the cities, the dates, the text itself, has been replaced by something fictional. Nothing in the document corresponds to anything a Bavarian official could verify. It reads like a letter from another civilization. This was normal correspondence inside the Illuminati. The pseudonyms, the renamed cities, the Persian calendar, the cipher, each of these elements had already been built into the order's architecture as individual security measures. But in daily practice, they operated simultaneously. A single piece of routine correspondence required a member to encrypt his text, sign with his codename, address it to another codename, date it on a calendar no one outside the order used, and reference a geography that existed only in the order's records. The effect was cumulative. The deeper a member went into the communication system, the further he drifted from the shared reality of the German-speaking world. This was deliberate. Each layer of encryption, the ciphered text, the pseudonyms, the renamed cities, the foreign calendar, served an obvious security function. If a letter was intercepted, the authorities would find an incomprehensible document addressed between fictional people in fictional places on a fictional date. Operationally, the system was effective, but the deeper consequence was cultural. Members who spent months inside this communication system began to think in it. Their pseudonyms stopped feeling like aliases and started feeling like identities. The codename geography stopped feeling like a security measure and started feeling like a real map, one that described the world as the order understood it, with the order's values and the order's frame of reference built into the place names. A member who wrote Athens for Munich wasn't just protecting himself from the authorities. He was inhabiting a version of Bavaria that the Illuminati had authored. The result was an organization that had sealed itself off from the outside world at the level of language itself. The Illuminati's members could talk to each other in a system no outsider could decode, and that system gradually became the primary lens through which they understood their own activities. They weren't civil servants meeting in a beer hall. They were classical figures in classical cities, on a calendar that predated Christianity, working toward goals that would take generations to achieve. This was the machine Weishaupt had built. Degrees that controlled access, surveillance that turned members into data, a communication system that sealed the entire order into its own reality. By 1782, the machine was sophisticated, it was paranoid, and it was about to attract exactly the kind of attention its designer had spent 6 years trying to avoid. In 1780, a 27-year-old German writer named Adolf Franz Friedrich, Freiherr von Kneiger, joined the Illuminati. Within 2 years, he would do more for the order than Weishaupt had managed in 4. Kneiger was everything Weishaupt was not. Where Weishaupt was a provincial academic who had never left Bavaria, Kneiger was a traveled aristocrat with connections across the German states. He was also a senior Freemason who understood the Masonic world from the inside, its lodges, its rivalries, its internal politics, and its appetite for new ideas. Weishaupt had rejected Freemasonry. Kneiger had mastered it. And while Weishaupt wrote letters complaining that his followers couldn't execute his plans, Kneiger walked into rooms and recruited the people in them. Before the Illuminati, Kneiger had been a writer and social reformer. He had published essays, maintained correspondence with prominent thinkers across Germany, and built a reputation as someone who understood the mechanics of social influence, how people formed groups, how groups gained authority, how authority could be directed towards specific ends. He joined the Illuminati because its stated goals matched his own: Enlightenment reform through organized action. What he found when he arrived was a small organization with ambitious principles and almost no capacity to act on them. Weishaupt had built the architecture. The structure existed, the degrees, the questionnaires, the code names, the cipher. But the order still numbered in the dozens, not thousands. Its members were mostly Weishaupt's own students and a scattering of local sympathizers. It had no presence outside Bavaria. It had no foothold in the institutions it claimed it would transform. It was, in Knäger's assessment, a philosophy club pretending to be a conspiracy. Knäger changed that. His method was recruitment, and his tool was Freemasonry. He understood that the Masonic lodge system, already spread across Europe, already organized into hierarchies, already operating in semi-secrecy, was the perfect infrastructure for Illuminati expansion. Rather than building a new network from scratch, the Illuminati could grow inside an existing one. Knäger began attending lodges, identifying dissatisfied members, men who found Masonic rituals hollow or who wanted their lodge work to lead to real-world political reform, and offering them something that felt more purposeful. His recruitment pitch was simple. The Illuminati had the goals that Freemasonry talked about, but never acted on. Where lodges debated virtue in the abstract, the Illuminati was building practical structures for changing society. A frustrated Freemason hearing that pitch for the first time would have recognized his own dissatisfaction being described back to him, and would have been offered a path beyond it. It worked. Between 1780 and 1782, the Illuminati's membership exploded. Knäger recruited across multiple German states, bringing in men of rank and education who would never have responded to a letter from an unknown professor in Ingolstadt. He gave the order credibility and geographic reach, access to exactly the class of people Weishaupt had always intended to recruit, but had never been able to reach on his own. The organization Knäger inherited had been a closed system operated by a frustrated academic. The organization he built was a network with active cells across the German-speaking world and a recruitment pipeline that ran through the most established fraternal institution in Europe. The man who showed up and actually could, the figure that Weishaupt's own limitations had made necessary, had arrived. The idea came before Knäger did. In 1777, a year after founding the Illuminati, Weishaupt did something that contradicted everything he had said about Freemasonry. He joined a Masonic lodge in Munich. The man who had dismissed the Masons as too expensive and too mystical walked into a lodge, paid the fees, learned the rituals, and became a member. He had not changed his mind about Freemasonry. He had realized what it was useful for. Masonic lodges in the late 18th century were everywhere. They operated in nearly every major European city. Their members included aristocrats, civil servants, military officers, academics, and clergy, exactly the profile of people the Illuminati wanted to recruit. The lodges already had meeting spaces, communication networks, and a culture of semi-secrecy that their members were accustomed to operating within. Building a parallel infrastructure from scratch would have taken years. Infiltrating one that already existed could take months. By 1779, the Illuminati had gained control of the Lodge of Theodore of Good Counsel in Munich. The takeover was not violent or dramatic. Illuminati members joined the lodge individually, rose through its ranks, and gradually shifted its leadership. From the outside, the Lodge of Theodore still looked like a Masonic lodge. It held Masonic meetings. It used Masonic rituals. But its senior officers were Illuminati. Its agenda was set by the order, and its new recruits were screened not for their interest in Masonic brotherhood, but for their potential usefulness to Weishaupt's project. This was the model that Knäger would later scale across the German states. The strategy depended on a distinction that most Freemasons did not fully grasp. Freemasonry and the Illuminati were fundamentally different organizations with fundamentally different purposes. Freemasonry had existed for decades, possibly centuries, as a fraternal society built around moral philosophy, ritual, and mutual support among members. It had no unified political agenda. Its lodges were independent. Its members joined for fellowship, social status, or intellectual stimulation. The Illuminati, by contrast, had been founded with specific political goals: to oppose the church's grip on public life, to resist the monarchy's abuse of power, and to advance Enlightenment principles through coordinated action. What Weishaupt and Knäger did was graft one organization onto the other. They treated the Masonic Lodge system as infrastructure, a host organism through which the Illuminati could spread without having to build its own. Illuminati members inside lodges would identify promising Freemasons, assess them, and recruit them into the order. The new recruit would continue attending his lodge, continue participating in Masonic activities, and simultaneously operate as an Illuminati agent within a Masonic structure that had no idea it was being used. The relationship was parasitic, and it worked precisely because the host was large and decentralized. No single Masonic authority could detect the pattern. A lodge in Munich might notice that several new members seemed to know each other unusually well. A lodge in Frankfurt might observe that certain members had started pushing for organizational reforms that sounded oddly similar. But without centralized coordination between lodges, which Freemasonry did not have, no one could see the larger picture: that a single, focused organization was systematically planting its members inside a sprawling, unfocused one. By the early 1780s, the strategy was producing results that Weishaupt had never managed alone. The Illuminati had members in lodges across Bavaria, Saxony, and beyond. It had moved from infiltrating a single lodge to operating within the Masonic system itself, and it was about to attempt something far more ambitious. In the summer of 1782, representatives from Masonic lodges across Europe gathered in the spa town of Wilhelmsbad, near Frankfurt, for a congress that was supposed to resolve a crisis. Freemasonry was fracturing. The dominant system at the time, the rite of strict observance, claimed that Masonic lodges were the direct descendants of the Knights Templar, and that the rituals Masons performed connected them to a medieval crusading order with ancient secrets. It was an appealing story, but by the 1780s, many lodge leaders no longer believed it, and the question of what Freemasonry actually was and what it was for had become genuinely contentious. The Congress of Wilhelmsbad was convened to settle the matter, to reform Masonic practice, to unify the competing systems, and to decide whether the Templar origin story would survive. Knäger arrived with a different agenda entirely. He came to Wilhelmsbad as a delegate, a respected Freemason with a reputation for organizational thinking. What most of the other delegates did not know was that he was also an Illuminati operative with a specific mission: recruit as many of them as possible and block any outcome that would consolidate Masonic authority in a way the Illuminati couldn't control. He succeeded on both counts. Over the course of the Congress, Knäger identified sympathetic delegates, men who were frustrated with the strict observance's mystical claims, men who wanted Freemasonry to serve a practical purpose, and brought them into the Illuminati's orbit. He did not need to recruit every delegate. He needed to recruit enough of them to ensure that the Congress's decisions would not threaten the Illuminati's growing presence inside the Masonic system. By the time the Congress concluded, the strict observance had been effectively dismantled as the dominant Masonic rite, and Knäger had built relationships with lodge leaders across the German states, France, and beyond. This was the high watermark. The Illuminati had gone from a handful of students in a single Bavarian city to an organization with influence inside the largest fraternal network in Europe. Its members held positions in Masonic lodges, in university faculties, in government offices, in the military. The order had not achieved its stated goals. It had not reformed society or dismantled the church's political power. But it had built the kind of organizational infrastructure that, in theory, could attempt those things. And that was the problem. An organization that operates in total secrecy is safe only as long as it remains invisible. The Illuminati's growth at Wilhelmsbad made it visible, not to the general public, but to the people who paid attention to what happened inside Masonic politics. Lodge leaders who had not been recruited began to wonder why certain colleagues had suddenly developed identical ideas about reform. Rival Masonic factions who had been outmaneuvered at the Congress began asking who had coordinated the effort. Whispers about a secret organization operating inside Freemasonry started circulating among the very people the Illuminati needed to keep unaware. Success had created a footprint, and footprints could be followed. The Order's most effective operation was also the beginning of its exposure. At its peak, the Illuminati had between 2,000 and 3,000 members. The number matters less than who those members were. The Order's ranks included ruling dukes, senior Freemasons, university professors, government ministers, military officers, clergymen, lawyers, and doctors. This was not a student club. By the early 1780s, the Illuminati had penetrated the administrative class of the German-speaking world, the people who ran institutions, advised rulers, and made decisions that affected entire provinces. The most famous name on the membership rolls was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, already recognized as one of the foremost writers in Europe. Goethe was initiated by Johann Joachim Christoph Bode, a translator and publisher who served as one of the Order's most effective recruiters. How deeply Goethe engaged with the Illuminati remains genuinely debated. His membership is confirmed. His level of commitment is not. He may have treated the Order as one more intellectual circle in a life full of them, or he may have taken it more seriously than his later reputation allowed him to admit. What is certain is that Bode brought him in, and that having Goethe's name associated with the Order gave it a cultural legitimacy that no amount of organizational engineering could have produced. Johann Gottfried von Herder, philosopher, theologian, and one of the intellectual architects of German Romanticism, was also a member. Like Goethe, the depth of his involvement remains disputed, but his name appeared on the rolls, and his presence added weight. Then there were the men who were not famous, but who were powerful. Duke Ernest II of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg held two Illuminati codenames, Quintus Severus and Timoleon, and served as Grand Master of the Freemasons in Germany. He joined in 1783, at the height of the Order's influence. Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, another senior figure in European Freemasonry, was also a member. These were men whose political authority extended across entire German states. Franz Xaver von Zwack, codename Cato, was a Bavarian civil servant and one of the Order's most dedicated operatives. His role in the Illuminati story would become central for reasons that belong to the next chapter. But at the peak of the Order's power, he was one of its most reliable administrators, a man who kept the records and managed the correspondence that held the organizational machinery together. The membership profile tells a story that the conspiracy theories never bother with. The Illuminati did not recruit from the margins. It recruited from the center, from the educated, the connected, and the administratively competent. These were men who already held institutional power. They joined the Order because they believed that power could be used for a purpose their existing institutions did not serve. Enlightenment reform, pursued through coordinated action rather than individual effort. This made the organization both impressive and fragile. Impressive because its members had genuine influence. They sat in councils, administered regions, corresponded with monarchs. Fragile because every one of those members had a public life that could be damaged. A philosophy student caught in a secret society risked expulsion. A duke caught in one risked a political scandal. The higher the Order reached, the more it had to lose. The two men who built the Illuminati could not stand each other. The tension had been present from the beginning. Weishaupt was the founder, the authority, the man who believed that the Order existed to execute his vision, and that every member's role was to follow the instructions passed down from the top. Knäger was the operator, the man who had actually made the organization function, and who believed that members capable of running lodges and recruiting aristocrats deserved more autonomy than Weishaupt was willing to grant. The conflict came down to a single question: who controlled the order? Weishaupt's answer was clear. He did. He had designed it, named it, written its principles, and served as its supreme authority for 6 years before Knege arrived. In his view, the expanded structure Knege had built was an extension of his original vision, and the members Knege had recruited owed their loyalty to that vision, not to the man who had enrolled them. Knege saw it differently. He had transformed a provincial experiment into a functioning network. He had designed the degree system that gave the order its organizational depth. He had recruited the members who gave it reach and credibility. And he had done all of this while Weishaupt sat in Ingolstadt writing letters that were, increasingly, complaints about how Knege was doing the work wrong. The correspondence between them deteriorated through 1783 and into 1784. Weishaupt accused Knege of overstepping his authority, of making promises to recruits that the order couldn't keep, of treating the Illuminati as his personal project rather than a collective enterprise. Knege accused Weishaupt of paranoia and an inability to share power with anyone who might challenge his intellectual dominance. Both men were probably right. In 1784, Knege withdrew from the order. He signed an agreement pledging silence about its internal affairs and walked away from the organization he had spent 4 years building. The Illuminati lost its best recruiter and the architect of the system that had made it viable. Weishaupt retained control of an organization that was, by that point, already attracting the kind of attention that would eventually destroy it. Knege went on to write a book. In 1788, he published Über den Umgang mit Menschen, On Human Relations, a guide to social conduct that became one of the most widely read German books of the 18th century. It was practical, witty, and thoroughly concerned with how individuals should navigate social hierarchies, manage professional relationships, and present themselves in polite company. It became so popular that Knege's own surname entered the German language as a synonym for etiquette. To this day, Ein Knege in German refers to a manual of proper social behavior. The man who infiltrated European Freemasonry and designed a 13-degree secret society, that man's lasting contribution to German culture is a book about table manners and how to make polite conversation at dinner parties. The irony would have been lost on no one who knew the full story. Almost no one does. The Illuminati did not collapse because a government discovered them. They collapsed because their own members gave them away. By 1783, the whispers that had started circulating after Wilhelmsbad had reached people outside the Masonic world entirely. Disillusioned former members, men who had joined expecting intellectual fellowship and found an organization that monitored their private lives, began talking. Some wrote letters to the authorities. Others spoke to clergy. A few defected directly, offering what they knew to the Bavarian government in exchange for protection or favor. The order that had built its security on compartmentalization discovered that compartmentalization worked only as long as every compartment remained loyal. Karl Theodor, the Elector of Bavaria, was not a patient man when it came to threats to his authority. He was a Catholic ruler governing a Catholic state, and the reports landing on his desk described an organization that explicitly opposed the Church's role in public life, promoted Enlightenment rationalism over religious doctrine, and had infiltrated the institutions his government relied on to function. Whether the Illuminati actually posed an existential threat to the Bavarian state is debatable. That Karl Theodor believed they did is not. In 1784, he issued an edict banning all unauthorized secret societies in Bavaria. The language was general. It did not name the Illuminati specifically, but the target was unmistakable. Any member of an unregistered organization who refused to disband faced prosecution. The edict was a warning shot. The government knew something was happening, and it was offering a chance to stop before the consequences became severe. The Illuminati did not stop. Whether this was defiance, disorganization, or a genuine belief that the edict wouldn't be enforced, the order continued to operate. Weishaupt continued to write letters. Members continued to attend meetings. The machine kept running as if the legal ground beneath it hadn't shifted. On March 2nd, 1785, Karl Theodor made the threat explicit. A second edict banned the Illuminati by name. The document identified the organization as a danger to the state and to the Catholic Church, and it carried the full weight of Bavarian law. Membership in the Illuminati was now a criminal offense. The edict had been encouraged by the church hierarchy, which had been receiving its own reports about an organization that treated religious authority as an obstacle to be dismantled. The order fractured almost immediately. Members in government positions, civil servants, military officers, academics with university appointments, faced a direct choice: the Illuminati or their careers. Most chose their careers. The resignation letters flowed upward through the same channels that had once carried surveillance reports. The hierarchy that had been designed to move information efficiently now moved abandonment efficiently. Two more edicts followed, in 1787 and 1790, tightening the restrictions and extending the penalties. By the time the last edict was issued, the Illuminati as a functioning organization had already ceased to exist. But the edicts were not the end of the story. They were the legal framework that authorized what came next: the raids. In October 1786, Bavarian police arrived at a house in Landshut, belonging to a civil servant they already had reason to suspect. What they found inside exceeded anything the government had anticipated. The civil servant was the man once listed on internal rolls as Cato, a dedicated administrator who had kept the Illuminati's operational machinery running for years. His home had not been secured. The order's most sensitive materials were still there, stored as if no one would ever come looking. The police seized the cipher, the Persian calendar, and the geographical key that decoded the order's fictional map back into real German cities. They seized the membership list, and they seized hundreds of pages of internal correspondence. Letters between members, directives from superiors, reports on other members, strategic discussions about the order's operations and goals. For the first time, the Bavarian government could see the Illuminati from the inside. Every layer of secrecy the order had built, the cipher, the calendar, the code names, the compartmentalized degree structure, was now laid out on a table in a government office, decoded and catalogued. But the seizure contained something else. Among the organizational documents were materials that had nothing to do with political reform or Enlightenment philosophy. There were texts defending atheism. There were discussions of suicide that appeared sympathetic rather than condemnatory. There were instructions related to abortion. There were recipes for invisible ink. In context, some of these materials were likely philosophical exercises, the kind of speculative writing that circulated in radical Enlightenment circles without any expectation that it would be acted upon. The Illuminati operated in an intellectual environment where challenging religious orthodoxy was a core activity, and written arguments about controversial subjects were part of that challenge. But context would not survive the document's journey from a government evidence room to the public record. What the Bavarian authorities had seized was not just an organization's filing cabinet. It was the raw material for a scandal. Private correspondence and provocative intellectual writings, produced inside an organization that most people had never heard of, were about to become public evidence of something that looked far more sinister than a network of Enlightenment reformers exchanging letters in code. The question of what would happen to the documents, whether they would be filed away, used in prosecutions, or released to the public, had not yet been answered. A second raid was already being planned. In May 1787, Bavarian authorities raided a castle at Sandersdorf, belonging to Baron Thomas Maria de Bassus, a member of the Illuminati, who had been storing documents on Weishaupt's behalf. Bassus's castle was not a headquarters, it was a hiding place. After the first raid in Landshut, Weishaupt had understood that his own correspondence was now the most dangerous thing the Order possessed, and he had attempted to move it out of reach. Some of the most sensitive materials, letters he had written to senior members, strategic documents outlining the Order's long-term plans, correspondence that revealed the internal mechanics of how decisions were made at the highest levels, had been entrusted to Bassus for safekeeping. The Bavarian government found them anyway. The Sandersdorf seizure complemented rather than duplicated what had been taken from the house in Landshut, where the first raid had uncovered the Order's operational infrastructure, the cipher, the calendar, the code names, the membership rolls. The second raid uncovered its strategic thinking. The letters seized at Sandersdorf included Weishaupt's own words about what the Illuminati was for, how it should grow, what it should ultimately achieve, and how he expected his subordinates to carry out the work. If the Landshut documents showed what the machine looked like, the Sandersdorf documents showed what the machine's designer had intended it to do. Together, the two caches produced something unprecedented in the history of secret societies: a comprehensive archive. The Bavarian government now possessed the Illuminati's organizational tools, its membership records, its internal correspondence, and its founder's strategic vision, all in the original documents. No other secret society of the 18th century, or arguably any century, had its internal workings exposed so completely while the memories of its operations were still fresh. This completeness would prove to be the most consequential fact about the Illuminati's collapse. The Order had not disappeared into rumor and hearsay the way most suppressed organizations did. It had left behind a paper trail so thorough that anyone who wanted to understand it, or misunderstand it, had an enormous body of primary sources to work with. The Bavarian government now had to decide what to do with all of it. They published everything. In 1787, the Bavarian government released the seized documents in 2 volumes. The first was titled Einige Originalschriften des Illuminaten Ordens, some original writings of the Order of the Illuminati. The second, a supplement, followed as Nachtrag von weiteren Originalschriften, supplement of further original writings. Together, the 2 volumes reproduced the Illuminati's internal correspondence, organizational records, and strategic planning in the original German, with minimal editorial commentary. Anyone who could read German could now read the Illuminati's own words. This was a deliberate choice. The Bavarian government could have sealed the documents as evidence in criminal proceedings. It could have summarized them in an official report. It could have destroyed them entirely, as many governments have done with seized materials from suppressed organizations. Instead, it chose to make the entire archive public, a decision that was almost certainly motivated by the desire to humiliate the Order and justify the edicts that had banned it. The published documents were intended as proof that the Illuminati had been dangerous and that the government had been right to suppress it. The decision achieved its immediate goal. The publications confirmed the worst suspicions of the Bavarian authorities. The letters showed members discussing the infiltration of government institutions. The philosophical writings contained passages that could be read as hostile to Christianity. The organizational records revealed a surveillance apparatus that most readers found disturbing, regardless of their politics. The Illuminati stood exposed, and the exposure was devastating. But the publication did something else, something the Bavarian government almost certainly did not intend. It created a permanent, publicly accessible primary source archive for an organization that would otherwise have faded from memory within a generation. Most suppressed secret societies disappear. Their documents are burned, their members scatter, and within a few decades, They survive only as footnotes in legal records. The Illuminati's documents were preserved in print. They could be purchased, read, quoted, excerpted, and, critically, reinterpreted by anyone with an agenda and a bookshelf. This is the single most consequential fact in the entire Illuminati story. Every conspiracy theory that would follow, every claim that the Illuminati secretly controlled the French Revolution, secretly ran the global financial system, would derive its plausibility from the existence of these published documents. The theorists could point to real letters. They could cite real organizational structures. They could quote real passages in which real members discussed real plans. The documents were genuine. The interpretations built on top of them were not. But the interpretations didn't need to be genuine as long as the foundation was. The Bavarian government had intended to bury the Illuminati. Instead, it had given them immortality. Adam Weishaupt was stripped of his professorship at the University of Ingolstadt. He was banished from Bavaria. He fled east, across the border, and found shelter in Gotha, in the Duchy of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, under the protection of the man who had once held the Illuminati codenames Quintus Severus and Timoleon, Duke Ernest II, who remained loyal to his former Grand Master, even after the organization they had both belonged to had been declared criminal. Weishaupt lived in Gotha for the remaining 45 years of his life. He wrote philosophical treatises. He revised old arguments. He composed lengthy defenses of the Illuminati and of his own conduct as its founder. Almost none of it was widely read. The man who had designed an organization intended to reshape European society spent his final decades in a provincial German town, producing work that attracted no significant audience and exerting no detectable influence on any institution or movement. He died on November 18, 1830, in Gotha. He was 82 years old. There is no credible evidence of Illuminati activity after 1785, the year the Second Edict was issued and the order's membership collapsed. Individual former members may have continued to hold Enlightenment views, may have continued to correspond privately, may have continued to think of themselves as part of something that had once mattered. But the organization itself, the degrees, the surveillance system, the cipher, the calendar, the chain of command, ceased to function. The machine stopped. The total achievement of the Bavarian Illuminati, measured against its stated goals, was zero. The order had not reformed a single institution. It had not dismantled the Church's political authority or replaced monarchical governance with Enlightenment principles. It had infiltrated some Masonic lodges, recruited some impressive names, built an elaborate internal surveillance apparatus, and collapsed under the weight of its own visibility in less than a decade. That is the historical record. A philosophy professor founded a secret society. The society grew, attracted powerful members, built a sophisticated system of internal control, and was destroyed by the state it had hoped to transform. Its founder died in obscurity. Its documents were published. Its members returned to their ordinary lives. The story should have ended there. Within a generation, the Illuminati should have become a footnote, one more suppressed organization in a century full of them. But in 1797, something happened that would make the word Illuminati more powerful than anything the order had ever accomplished while it existed. 2 books were about to be published, and the conspiracy theory was about to be born. In 1797, 12 years after the Illuminati ceased to exist, a French Jesuit priest named Augustin Baruel published the first volume of a work that would reshape the order's legacy permanently. The book was called Mémoires pour servir à l'histoire du jacobinisme, Memoir illustrating the history of Jacobinism. It ran to 4 volumes, published between 1797 and 1798, and its central argument was straightforward. The French Revolution had not been a spontaneous popular uprising. It had been engineered. The philosophes had begun the work of undermining the church and the monarchy through ideas. The Freemasons had provided the organizational infrastructure, and the Illuminati, operating in secret, long after their supposed dissolution, had coordinated the final execution. Barruel's thesis required an enormous leap. The Bavarian Illuminati had been suppressed in 1785. The French Revolution began in 1789. 4 years separated the order's collapse from the event it was supposed to have orchestrated. There was no evidence that the Illuminati had ever operated in France. There was no evidence that any French revolutionary leader had been a member. There was no organizational link, no correspondence, no document in the published Bavarian archives that connected the Illuminati to events in Paris. Barruel solved this problem by treating the absence of evidence as proof of the conspiracy's sophistication. The Illuminati had been banned, yes, but a truly effective secret society would not simply disappear because a single German state made it illegal. It would go underground and continue operating through its members, who were embedded in Masonic lodges across Europe. It would shed its name, its visible structure, its paper trail, and carry on its work through proxies and front organizations that could not be traced back to the original order. The fact that no one could find the Illuminati after 1785 was, in Barruel's framework, evidence that the Illuminati had gotten better at hiding. This was a powerful argument, not because it was true, but because it was unfalsifiable. If evidence of Illuminati involvement existed, it proved the conspiracy. If no evidence existed, it proved the conspiracy was well hidden. There was no observation that could disprove the theory, because the theory had been designed to absorb every possible observation. Barruel built his case on the published Bavarian documents, the same archive the government had released in 1787. The archive gave him genuine letters, genuine organizational records, and a factual foundation strong enough to make his speculative extensions feel like natural continuations of the evidence. Everything up to the order's dissolution in 1785 was grounded. Everything after it was Barruel's invention, and most readers did not notice where one ended and the other began. The book was enormously successful. It was translated into multiple languages, read across Europe, and treated by conservative audiences as a definitive explanation of how the French Revolution had happened. For readers who found the revolution incomprehensible, who could not accept that an entire political order could collapse without a hidden hand directing the destruction, Barruel provided exactly the answer they were looking for. In the same year that Barruel published his first volume, a Scottish physicist named John Robison published a book of his own. Robison was a professor of natural philosophy at the University of Edinburgh, a scientist, a man of the Enlightenment, and a Freemason. He had once been sympathetic to the ideals that the French Revolution claimed to represent. But the revolution's descent into the terror, the mass executions, the political purges, the collapse of every institution that had given French society its structure, had turned him into an ardent monarchist who believed that the revolution had been orchestrated from the beginning. His book was called Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies. The title alone took up most of the cover page. The argument inside was essentially the same as Barruel's. The Illuminati had infiltrated Freemasonry and used the lodges to engineer the French Revolution as the culmination of a decades-long conspiracy. Robison and Barruel had not coordinated. They worked on different sides of the English Channel, in different languages, drawing on different sources, though both relied heavily on the published Bavarian documents. The fact that two authors, working independently, had arrived at the same conclusion made each book more credible. Readers could point to the convergence as evidence. If a French priest and a Scottish scientist had both identified the same conspiracy without collaborating, the conspiracy must be real. The alternative, that both men had made the same interpretive error, by reading the same source material through the same anxieties, was less satisfying and required more intellectual effort to accept. Roberson's book found its largest audience in Britain and in the young United States, where it circulated widely in the years immediately following its publication. The implications of what that American readership did with the theory belong to a later part of this story. What matters here is the structural fact. By 1798, two independently written books, by two credible authors from two different intellectual traditions, had established the core narrative. The Illuminati had not died. They had gone underground. They were behind the French Revolution, and they were still operating. The conspiracy theory now had a canon. What Barruel and Roberson had created was not just a theory about the French Revolution. It was a narrative machine, a structure that could be detached from the specific events of 1789 and reattached to anything. The structure works like this. A secret group exists. It is discovered and banned. But the banning does not destroy it. It merely forces the group underground, where it continues to operate invisibly. Every major event that follows can now be attributed to this hidden group. The group does not need to be caught. The theory treats the absence of evidence as proof that the group is too effective to leave any. This is the template. And the template is what made the Illuminati conspiracy theory different from every other conspiracy theory that had come before it. Before Barruel and Roberson, conspiracy theories were typically attached to specific events and specific actors. A particular minister was accused of plotting against the king. A particular faction was accused of engineering a particular crisis. These theories had natural lifespans. They lasted as long as the events they described remained politically relevant, and they faded when those events receded from public memory. The Illuminati template did not work this way. It was not bound to a single event. It was a portable explanation, a narrative structure that could be lifted out of the French Revolution and placed onto any subsequent event that needed explaining. All you had to do was substitute the variable. The Illuminati were behind the French Revolution. The Illuminati were behind the Congress of Vienna. The Illuminati were behind the revolutions of 1848. The Illuminati were behind the First World War. Each new application of the template reinforced it, because each application created the impression of a pattern, and the pattern could never be disproven, because the theory had been constructed to treat disproof as confirmation. The published Bavarian documents gave this template something that most conspiracy theories lack: a verified factual foundation. The founding, the rituals, the Masonic infiltration, the suppression, all of it was documented and genuine. The speculative extensions built on top of that foundation could borrow its credibility without earning it. Readers who accepted the historical portion had no obvious reason to reject the speculative portion, because the speculative portion was presented as a logical continuation of the facts. This is the invention. The Illuminati themselves were real, and they have already been accounted for. What Barruel and Roberson invented was the template, a reusable narrative technology that transforms a defunct Bavarian secret society into the permanent, invisible author of history itself. The template crossed the Atlantic almost immediately. In 1798, 1 year after Roberson's book appeared in the United States, a Congregationalist minister named Jedediah Morse delivered a series of sermons from his pulpit in Massachusetts, warning that the Illuminati had infiltrated American institutions. Morse was not a fringe figure. He was one of the most respected clergymen in New England, the author of the first American geography textbook, and the father of Samuel Morse, who would later invent the telegraph. When Jedediah Morse told his congregation that a Bavarian secret society was secretly undermining the American Republic, people listened. That same year, Timothy Dwight, the president of Yale University, delivered his own sermon warning that the Illuminati threatened to corrupt American society. Dwight was a grandson of Jonathan Edwards, and one of the most prominent intellectual figures in the country. His warning carried institutional authority. If the president of Yale believed the Illuminati were operating in America, the claim had a credibility that no pamphleteer could match. The Federalist Party saw an opportunity. The young republic was bitterly divided between the Federalists, who favored a strong central government and close ties with Britain, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, who sympathized with the ideals of the French Revolution and favored a more decentralized system. The Illuminati theory provided the Federalists with a weapon. They could accuse Jefferson and his supporters of being Illuminati sympathizers, agents of the same conspiracy that had supposedly engineered the revolution in France. The accusation reframed a domestic political disagreement as a struggle against a foreign secret society, and it made opposition to the Federalist agenda look like collaboration with an enemy. The scare lasted approximately 2 years. By 1800, the political context had shifted. More pressing concerns had eclipsed the Illuminati panic, and the accusations lost their potency. No evidence of Illuminati activity in the United States was ever produced. The sermons were forgotten. The political weapon was set aside. But the pattern had been established. The Illuminati had been used, for the first time, as a partisan political accusation, a way to delegitimize political opponents by linking them to a foreign conspiracy. The theory bore no relationship to the actual Bavarian Illuminati. It was a projection of the anxieties of the people making the accusation. And it worked, briefly, because the template Barrowell and Robertson had built was flexible enough to absorb American politics as easily as it had absorbed the French Revolution. The variable had been substituted. The structure remained the same. Over the course of the 19th century, the Illuminati conspiracy theory split into 3 distinct branches. Each took the same template and filled it with different content. Each served a different audience. All 3 are still active today. The first was the political branch. This was the version that had appeared earliest. Barrowell and Robertson had both framed the conspiracy as fundamentally political, a plot to overthrow governments and destroy the existing social order. Conservatives used the theory against liberals and reformers. Anyone who advocated political change could be accused of carrying out the Illuminati's agenda, whether they knew it or not. The American Scare of 1798 was an early example. The pattern would repeat throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, adapted to whichever political conflict was most urgent at the time. The second was the religious branch. In this version, the Illuminati were not merely political revolutionaries, they were agents of Satan. The conspiracy was not just against governments, but against God, and its ultimate goal was not political reform, but the destruction of Christianity itself. This version drew heavily on Barrowell's framing, which had placed the Catholic Church at the center of what the Illuminati sought to destroy, and it found its most receptive audience among evangelical Protestant communities, who already understood history as a struggle between divine and demonic forces. The third branch was the most dangerous, and its history must be stated plainly. In 1806, Barrowell began circulating a forged letter that implicated Jews in the same conspiracy he had originally attributed to the Illuminati and the Freemasons. The letter claimed that Jews had been secretly directing the conspiracy from behind even the Illuminati, that the order itself had been a front for a deeper, older plot. This was a fabrication. There was no Jewish involvement in the Bavarian Illuminati. Weishaupt was not Jewish, but the forgery introduced a new element into the template: the idea that behind every visible conspiracy lay a hidden Jewish one. The fabrication spread. Over the following decades, some versions of the theory began claiming that Weishaupt had been secretly Jewish, another invention designed to fuse the Illuminati conspiracy with existing anti-Semitic narratives. By the early 20th century, this fusion produced the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a document published in Russia between 1903 and 1905 fabricated by agents of the Russian secret police and plagiarized from an 1864 French political satire that had nothing to do with Jews. The protocols borrowed the template that Barruel and Robeson had built, a secret group operating invisibly, directing world events from the shadows, and attached it to a fabricated Jewish conspiracy. The Nazi regime adopted the protocols as propaganda from 1933 onward and used them to justify the persecution and eventual murder of millions of Jews. The document that had begun as a forged addition to an Illuminati conspiracy theory became one of the foundational texts of modern anti-Semitism. These three branches, political, religious, anti-Semitic, did not develop in isolation. They overlapped, reinforced each other, and borrowed each other's language. But they are distinct in their audiences and their consequences, and the third branch's consequences were, by any measure, the most catastrophic. The question of why the Illuminati conspiracy theory has survived for more than 2 centuries, why it did not fade the way the American scare of 1798 faded, has attracted serious scholarly attention. In 1964, the historian Richard Hofstadter published an essay called "The Paranoid Style in American Politics." He was not diagnosing a mental illness. He was describing a recurring mode of political argument, a style that sees vast, sinister conspiracies behind ordinary events and treats political opponents not as adversaries who hold different views, but as agents of a hidden enemy. Hofstadter identified the Illuminati scare of 1798 as one of the earliest American examples of this style, operated within the framework that Barruel and Robeson had built. These scholars did not agree on everything, but they converged on one observation. The Illuminati conspiracy theory persists not because it is true, but because it performs a function. It transforms complexity into intent. It replaces the discomfort of living in a world shaped by impersonal forces with the clarity of living in a world shaped by a hidden hand. And as long as that function is needed, as long as the world continues to produce events that feel too large and too consequential to have happened without a plan, the template will continue to find users. If you ask someone to draw the Illuminati symbol, they will almost certainly draw an eye inside a triangle. They will not draw an owl. By now, you know why. The Owl of Minerva, the actual symbol, the one that appeared on the Illuminati's own documents, does not feel like what people want the Illuminati to be. It feels academic. It feels like exactly what it was, the emblem of a university professor's secret society. The eye inside the triangle feels vast, ancient, omniscient. It feels like a symbol that belongs to the kind of organization the conspiracy theory describes, even though the Illuminati never used it. The gap tells you something important about how the conspiracy theory works. It does not require accuracy. It does not need the Illuminati's actual imagery, just as it does not need the Illuminati's actual history. What it needs are symbols that feel powerful, that feel connected to something larger than a Bavarian reading club. So where did the eye come from? Its real history has nothing to do with the Illuminati. The Eye of Providence is an eye enclosed in a triangle, surrounded by rays of light. It is a Christian symbol. It represents God's benevolent oversight of humanity, divine providence, the idea that God sees all and watches over creation. Its origins are in late Renaissance religious art, where the triangle represented the Holy Trinity and the eye represented the omniscience of God. It appeared in churches across Europe for centuries before anyone in Ingolstadt had heard of Adam Weishaupt. In 1776, Pierre-Eugène du Cimetière proposed the Eye of Providence as part of the design for the Great Seal of the United States. Du Cimetière was a Swiss-born artist living in Philadelphia. He was not a Freemason. He was not connected to any secret society. He selected the eye because it was a widely recognized symbol of divine guidance, appropriate for a new nation that wanted to signal that its founding was blessed by God. The Great Seal was adopted in 1782. The Eye of Providence sat above an unfinished pyramid on the seal's reverse side. The Bavarian Illuminati at this point still existed, but they were operating in Bavaria, had no presence in the United States, and had no involvement whatsoever in the design of the American seal. The Eye of Providence became a Masonic symbol starting in 1797, 12 years after the Illuminati had been dissolved. The Freemasons adopted it independently, drawing on the same Christian iconographic tradition that Du Cimetière had used. The adoption had nothing to do with the Illuminati's infiltration of Masonic lodges, which had ended with the order's suppression. The eye appeared on the reverse of the United States $1 bill in 1935, when Henry Wallace, Secretary of Agriculture under Franklin Roosevelt, proposed incorporating the Great Seal's reverse into the currency design. Roosevelt approved it. Neither Wallace nor Roosevelt was acting on behalf of the Illuminati. The decision was motivated by the symbolism of the New Deal era, a new beginning under divine guidance. At no point in this entire chronology, from Renaissance churches to the Continental Congress to the Treasury Department, were the Illuminati involved. The Eye of Providence was a Christian symbol, then a national symbol, then a Masonic symbol, then a piece of currency design. It was never an Illuminati symbol. The conspiracy theory took it anyway. Below the pyramid on the Great Seal, there is a Latin motto, Novus Ordo Seclorum. In conspiracy theory circles, this is translated as New World Order, proof, supposedly, that the founders of the United States were announcing their allegiance to a secret plan for global domination. The actual translation is a new order of the ages. It refers to the beginning of the American era, the idea that 1776 marked the start of something historically unprecedented. The phrase was suggested by Charles Thompson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress, in 1782. Thompson was a classicist. He took the phrase from Virgil's Fourth Eclogue, a poem celebrating the birth of a new golden age. The word ordo in Latin means a sequence, a series, an arrangement, not a system of control, not an organization, not a conspiracy. New World Order is not a translation, it is a fabrication. The pyramid beneath the motto has 13 steps. In conspiracy theory, the number 13 is treated as a cult, proof of hidden numerological intent. In the actual design, the 13 steps represent the 13 original states. This was stated explicitly at the time the seal was designed, and it has been a matter of public record for nearly 2.5 centuries. At the base of the pyramid, the Roman numerals M, D, C, L, X, X, 5. I spell out 1776, the year of the Declaration of Independence. This is the one detail where the conspiracy theory finds an apparent foothold, because 1776 is also the year Adam Weishaupt founded the Bavarian Illuminati. The coincidence is real. The connection is not. The Great Seal's designers were commemorating the founding of the American Republic. They were not commemorating a secret society in Ingolstadt that most of them had never heard of. The date on the seal refers to July 4th. The Illuminati were founded on May 1st. The two events share a year and nothing else. Every element on the Great Seal that conspiracy theorists cite as evidence of Illuminati influence has a documented, verifiable, non-conspiratorial explanation. The eye is Christian. The motto is Virgilian. The pyramid is patriotic. The date is American. The conspiracy theory requires you to reject all of these documented explanations and replace them with an interpretation that has no supporting evidence of any kind. What happened to the Eye of Providence is not a mistake. It is a process. And it is the same process that has happened to every symbol the Illuminati conspiracy theory has claimed as its own. The process works in 2 stages. First, a symbol is detached from its actual history. The Eye of Providence is separated from Christian iconography. from Du Cimetière, from Thompson, from the Continental Congress, from the entire documented record of how and why it was created. Its real origins are not refuted, they are simply ignored. The symbol is treated as though it appeared from nowhere, carrying no meaning other than what the conspiracy theory assigns to it. Second, the symbol is reattached to the conspiracy narrative. The eye becomes the Illuminati eye. The pyramid becomes the Illuminati pyramid. The motto becomes the Illuminati motto. The reattachment does not require evidence. It requires only repetition. The symbol appears alongside the word Illuminati, often enough that the association becomes automatic. Once the association is established, it becomes self-reinforcing. The symbol proves the conspiracy, and the conspiracy explains the symbol. This is how a brand works. A brand does not describe the product. It replaces the product's actual identity with a curated one. The conspiracy theory selected its symbols the way a corporation selects a logo, not for accuracy, not for historical fidelity, but for recognition and impact. The Eye of Providence is visually striking, immediately recognizable, and already associated with power, surveillance, and secrecy in the popular imagination. It is the perfect logo for a conspiracy theory about a hidden group that secretly watches and controls the world. The fact that it has nothing to do with the Illuminati is, from a branding perspective, irrelevant. The owl of Minerva, the real symbol, could never have served this function. It is too small, too academic, too obscure. It looks like what it is, the emblem of an 18th century philosophical society. It does not suggest global power. It does not suggest hidden surveillance. It does not appear on the currency of the world's most powerful nation. The conspiracy theory needed a better logo, and it found one, by taking someone else's. The wrong symbols are not a flaw in the conspiracy theory. They are a feature. They reveal that the theory's relationship to the real Illuminati is not one of investigation, but of appropriation. The theory does not study the Illuminati. It uses them, their name and symbols that were never theirs, as raw material for a narrative that serves entirely different purposes. In the late 1950s, two friends in California, Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley, invented a religion. They called it Discordianism, and they dedicated it to Eris, the Greek goddess of chaos and discord. The religion had one central tenet. All belief systems, including this one, were fundamentally absurd. Dogma was the enemy. Certainty was the joke. The only honest response to a universe that made no sense was to embrace the nonsense deliberately. In 1965, Hill published the Principia Discordia, a slim, chaotic booklet that served as the religion's sacred text, though calling it sacred was itself part of the joke. The Principia mixed real philosophy with fake footnotes, genuine epistemological arguments with deliberate gibberish, and sincerity with absurdity in proportions that were impossible to separate. It was designed to make readers uncertain about what was real and what wasn't, and then to make them uncertain about whether that distinction mattered. The Discordians developed a practice they called Operation Mindfuck. The idea was simple: flood the information environment with contradictory claims, fake conspiracy theories, and elaborate hoaxes until no one could tell the difference between authentic information and manufactured nonsense. In Discordian thinking, this was liberation. If all claims to authority were equally suspect, then no authority could claim your obedience. Operation Mindfuck was an epistemological weapon aimed at the very concept of reliable knowledge. The Illuminati became the Discordians' favorite vehicle. The conspiracy theory was perfect for their purposes. It was elaborate enough to be entertaining, historical enough to sound plausible, and paranoid enough to function as both a genuine warning and a parody of genuine warnings. The Discordians began writing fake Illuminati material, letters, pamphlets, coded messages, and sending them to newspapers, politicians, and anyone else who might take them seriously or pass them along. The boundary between the real Illuminati conspiracy theory and the Discordian parody of it began to dissolve almost immediately. This dissolution was the point. The Discordians were not trying to debunk the Illuminati conspiracy theory. They were trying to make the concept of reliable debunking impossible. If you couldn't tell whether a piece of Illuminati literature was written by a true believer or by a Discordian prankster, then the question of whether the Illuminati were real became unanswerable, which, in Discordian philosophy, was exactly the right answer. Two of the people most deeply immersed in this project were about to write a novel. Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea were editors at Playboy magazine, where part of their job involved reading the letters that came into the publication's forum section. Many of these letters contained conspiracy theories, elaborate, contradictory, sometimes fascinating, often paranoid. Wilson and Shea began collecting them, cross-referencing them, and noticing that the Illuminati appeared in a disproportionate number. Both men were deeply involved in the Discordian movement. Both were fascinated by the question of how conspiracy theories functioned as narratives, not whether they were true, but why they were so compelling. In 1975, they published the Illuminatus trilogy, 3 novels released under the titles The Eye in the Pyramid, The Golden Apple, and Leviathan. The books were dense, chaotic, and deliberately disorienting. They blended every conspiracy theory Wilson and Shea had encountered: the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Kennedy assassination, ancient Atlantis, numerology, occultism, government surveillance, into a single sprawling narrative that treated all of them as simultaneously true and false. Characters who appeared to be paranoid were sometimes correct. Characters who appeared to be rational were sometimes deluded. The reader was given no stable ground. The trilogy introduced the 23 enigma, the idea that the number 23 appears with uncanny frequency in significant events and contexts. Wilson did not invent this observation. The writer William S. Burroughs had noted it earlier. But Wilson embedded it so thoroughly into the novels that it became inseparable from Illuminati mythology. Readers began noticing the number 23 everywhere, in dates, addresses, news reports, which was, of course, exactly the kind of pattern recognition feedback loop that the books were designed to create. What made the Illuminatus trilogy different from every previous Illuminati text was its refusal to commit to a position. Barruel had been sincere. Robertson had been sincere. The American preachers of 1798 had been sincere. Wilson and Shea were sincere and ironic at the same time. They genuinely believed that power structures operated in secretive and unaccountable ways. And they also believed that the specific conspiracy theories describing those power structures were largely nonsense. The novels occupied both positions simultaneously, and they expected their readers to hold both positions at once. This stance, what critics would later call playful paranoia, became the dominant mode of Illuminati discourse in popular culture for the next 50 years. After Wilson and Shea, the Illuminati were no longer primarily a subject of earnest fear or scholarly analysis. They were a subject of ironic entertainment, something you could reference with a knowing smile, something that was fun precisely because you weren't sure whether you believed it or not. The trilogy did not kill the conspiracy theory, it made it cool. The Discordians and the Illuminatus. Trilogy treated the Illuminati conspiracy theory as a toy, something to be played with, deconstructed, and reassembled for entertainment. The assumption, to the extent that there was one, was that making conspiracy theories funny would make them harmless. If everyone understood that the Illuminati were a joke, no one would take them seriously. The opposite happened. Making the conspiracy theory entertaining made it more viral, not less. A conspiracy theory that was frightening appealed only to people who were already anxious. A conspiracy theory that was fun appealed to everyone. The ironic mode that Wilson and Shea had pioneered removed the social cost of engaging with conspiracy thinking. You didn't have to be a paranoid extremist to talk about the Illuminati. You just had to be in on the joke. The barrier to entry dropped to zero. The problem was that ironic repetition and sincere repetition are functionally identical. When someone says, "The Illuminati control the music industry," whether they are joking or not, they are placing the word Illuminati next to the word control in the listener's mind. Repeat this often enough, across enough conversations and contexts, and the association becomes embedded regardless of the speaker's intent. The vocabulary normalizes. The concepts become familiar. The distance between "I'm joking about the Illuminati running things" and "I half believe the Illuminati run things" is shorter than most people assume, and ironic repetition closes that distance with every iteration. The joke escaped the laboratory. The Discordians had designed Operation Mindfuck as a contained experiment, a way to expose the absurdity of certainty within a community that understood what was happening. Wilson and Shea had written a novel for readers sophisticated enough to hold sincerity and irony simultaneously, but cultural products do not remain within their intended audiences. The Illuminatus trilogy reached readers who did not share Wilson's epistemological framework. The ironic distance collapsed. The joke became, for some readers, a genuine introduction to conspiracy thinking, a gateway drug administered in a form that felt safe precisely because it presented itself as entertainment. By the time the next generation of artists, musicians, and filmmakers encountered the Illuminati, the novels were satirical. Brown wrote for a mass audience that largely did not. His readers were not in on a joke. They were consuming a thriller and absorbing, in the process, a set of assumptions. That powerful secret societies operate behind the scenes of history, that symbols contain hidden messages, that the truth is always being concealed by someone. The assumptions were presented as fiction, but fiction has a way of shaping the intuitions of its audience. The commercial success of Angels and Demons and the Da Vinci Code completed a transformation. The Illuminati had begun as a historical organization. They had become a conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory had become a satirical novel, and the satirical novel had become a mass-market entertainment product. At each stage, the connection to the actual Bavarian Illuminati grew thinner, and the brand grew more powerful. By the early 2000s, the word Illuminati no longer referred to anything specific. It referred to a feeling, the feeling that hidden forces control the visible world, and that feeling could be packaged and sold in any format. In 1995, a rapper named Prodigy, one half of the Queen's duo Mobb Deep, recorded a lyric that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in the Illuminati's cultural life. "Illuminati want my mind, soul, and my body." The line appeared on a remix track, and it introduced the word Illuminati to an audience that had largely never encountered it: young, black, urban, and deeply skeptical of the institutions that governed the music industry. The following year, Jay-Z sampled the reference on Reasonable Doubt, his debut album. And around the same time, Tupac Shakur, who had been immersed in conspiracy thinking during the final months of his life, titled his posthumous album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory. The word Killuminati was Tupac's coinage, a declaration of war against invisible powers that he believed controlled the entertainment industry. These were not academic references. None of these artists were citing Barruel or Robeson. They were expressing something that felt true based on their direct experience of the music business, an industry in which young artists regularly signed contracts they did not understand, surrendered their intellectual property to corporations run by people they never met, and watched their labor generate enormous wealth for executives whose names the public never learned. The music industry was, in fact, opaque. It was, in fact, exploitative. And the conspiracy theory provided a vocabulary for describing that exploitation. The Illuminati theory resonated in hip-hop, because it named a real dynamic. The details were wrong. There was no secret society pulling the strings. But the underlying observation was defensible. The music industry operated through hidden power structures, opaque contracts, and an economic model in which the people who created the product received a fraction of the value they generated. Calling this system the Illuminati was not accurate, but it was not entirely metaphorical either. It was a shorthand for a real experience of powerlessness within a system designed to extract value from artists. The word entered the mainstream vocabulary of hip-hop and, through hip-hop, the broader culture. Within a decade, Illuminati would become one of the most frequently referenced conspiracy concepts in popular music, repeated across thousands of songs, interviews, and social media posts. The conspiracy theory had found the vehicle that would carry it further and faster than any book ever could. No artists have been more persistently accused of Illuminati membership than Jay-Z and Beyoncé. The accusation began with a hand gesture. Jay-Z's Rockefeller Records label used a diamond shape as its logo, a branding decision made in the 1990s to represent commercial ambition. Jay-Z threw the diamond gesture at concerts, in videos, and in photographs. Conspiracy theorists reinterpreted the gesture as a representation of the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence from the Great Seal, which by this point had been so thoroughly misattributed to the Illuminati that the misattribution had become its primary cultural meaning. The evidence accumulated. Jay-Z's On to the Next One music video featured skull imagery, inverted crosses, and visual elements that conspiracy theorists interpreted as Baphomet references. Beyoncé's 2013 Super Bowl halftime performance, during which she flashed a variation of the diamond gesture, generated an explosion of online analysis, claiming that the performance was a public Illuminati ritual. Every visual choice, every costume detail, every lighting cue was scrutinized for hidden symbolism. In 2016, Beyoncé addressed the accusations directly. In Formation, she sang, "Y'all haters corny with that Illuminati mess." It was an explicit dismissal, a public statement that the conspiracy theory was absurd. The response proved nothing to the theorists. In the logic of conspiracy thinking, denial is confirmation. If Jay-Z and Beyoncé were members of the Illuminati, they would naturally deny it. Secrecy is the defining characteristic of membership. If they ignored the accusations, their silence was suspicious. If they denied them, the denial was exactly what an Illuminati member would say. If they acknowledged them ironically, which Jay-Z did on multiple occasions, incorporating Illuminati imagery into his visual branding with apparent amusement, the irony was interpreted as a coded admission. The theory Barruel had built 2 centuries earlier was doing exactly what it was designed to do, absorbing every response, denial, silence, irony, as further confirmation. There was no exit from the accusation, because the accusation had never required evidence to begin with. The accusations were never about the Bavarian Illuminati. They were about a deeper question that the conspiracy theory has always been used to ask. How did these people become this successful? The theory provided an answer that was more satisfying than the real one. That extraordinary talent, combined with relentless work and strategic business decisions, might produce extraordinary success. A secret society was a more compelling explanation than a decade of recording sessions. While hip-hop was turning the Illuminati into a vocabulary for describing power, the entertainment industry was turning them into something simpler, a villain. Deus Ex 2000 built its entire narrative around a shadowy Illuminati manipulating global events from behind the scenes. Assassin's Creed 2007 replaced the name with Templars, but used an identical structure, a secret order embedded in the institutions of power, pulling strings across centuries. National Treasure 2004 turned the founding of America into a treasure hunt laced with Masonic and quasi-Illuminati symbolism. Marvel Comics assembled a literal team called the Illuminati, a group of superheroes who met in secret to make decisions about the fate of the world without consulting anyone else. The Illuminati had become what dragons are to fantasy fiction, a stock element. A dragon in a novel does not require an origin story. No one asks where the dragon came from or whether dragons are real. The dragon is a narrative shortcut. It signals danger, scale, and the existence of forces beyond human control. The Illuminati now functioned the same way. A game or film could introduce them without explanation. The audience already knew what Illuminati meant, not because they had read Barrow or studied Bavarian history, but because they had absorbed the concept through decades of cultural repetition. The Illuminati were preloaded. The entertainment industry had completed the transformation that Dan Brown's novels began. A conspiracy theory that had once required belief now required only recognition, a logo, a shorthand, a default setting for any story about hidden power. The word Illuminati had become a genre tag. Sometime in the early 2000s, a format emerged on the internet that would become the Illuminati conspiracy theory's most efficient distribution mechanism, the Illuminati confirmed meme. The format was simple. Take any image, find a triangle in it, a slice of pizza, a roof, the gap between someone's arm and their torso, a Dorito chip. Circle the triangle. Add the caption, Illuminati confirmed. The joke was that triangles exist everywhere, and therefore everything is connected to the Illuminati, and therefore the conspiracy theory is simultaneously proven and absurd. The meme was knowingly ridiculous. The people sharing it understood that finding a triangle in a photograph did not constitute evidence of secret society activity. That was the joke, the deliberate application of conspiracy logic to objects so mundane that the logic itself became the punchline. It was, in a sense, the mass-market version of what the Discordians had attempted with Operation Mindfuck, making conspiracy thinking so visible that its absurdity became undeniable. But the meme did something its creators did not intend. It trained millions of people, most of them young, most of them online, to perform the basic cognitive operation of conspiracy thinking. Identify a symbol, assign it hidden meaning, and declare that the hidden meaning proves a hidden truth. The operation was performed ironically, but the operation was still performed. Every Illuminati-confirmed post reinforced the association between ordinary shapes and secret power, between the visible world and invisible control. The meme taught pattern recognition as comedy, and the pattern recognition persisted after the comedy faded. The internet did not invent this dynamic. Wilson and Shea had identified it decades earlier, but the internet scaled it to a degree that no novel or counterculture movement could have achieved. The Illuminati-confirmed meme reached hundreds of millions of people, most of whom had never heard of the Bavarian Illuminati, the Illuminatus, trilogy, or Adam Weishaupt. They encountered the Illuminati as a meme, and the meme was their entire frame of reference. The historical organization, the conspiracy theory, the satirical novel, all of it had been compressed into a single punchline. And the punchline had made the word Illuminati the default vocabulary for any claim about hidden influence, hidden power, or hidden control, whether the claim was made in earnest or not. In 2017, an anonymous poster on the image board 4chan began publishing cryptic messages claiming insider knowledge of a secret war between Donald Trump and a cabal of powerful elites who controlled the United States government from within. The poster was identified only as Q. The movement that formed around these messages, QAnon, would become the most significant conspiracy phenomenon of the 21st century. QAnon did not mention the Illuminati by name. It did not need to. Its structural DNA was identical. A shadowy elite operates behind the scenes of legitimate institutions. only a few enlightened individuals can see the truth. Coded messages reveal the plot to those who know how to read them, and the absence of evidence for the conspiracy is itself evidence of how powerful the conspirators are. Every structural element that Baruel had introduced in 1797 was present in QAnon 220 years later. The template born in 1797 had found its most powerful application. The deep state narrative, the claim that unelected officials embedded within the government were secretly undermining the president, was structurally identical to the Illuminati narrative. Secret controllers embedded within legitimate institutions, invisible to the public, wielding real power while the visible government served as a facade. The vocabulary had changed. The architecture had not. When the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020, the framework expanded again. Claims that global elites had orchestrated the crisis for the purpose of controlling populations through vaccines, lockdowns, or economic disruption mapped directly onto the narrative structure that the Illuminati theory had established. A hidden group, a global plan, an ordinary person's inability to see the truth. The framework was portable. It could be applied to any crisis, any institution, any event that felt too large to be accidental. The template that had been built in 1797 had reached its final form. The specific name, Illuminati, deep state, cabal, globalists, was interchangeable. The cast, the plot, the epistemology, the emotional payload were fixed. The conspiracy theory had become infrastructure, permanent, portable, and available to anyone who needed it. None of this explains why people believe. The history of the conspiracy theory explains how it spread. The analysis of its structure explains how it works. But neither addresses the question that matters most. What is the appeal? The easy answer is gullibility. People believe in the Illuminati because they are credulous, poorly educated, or insufficiently exposed to critical thinking. This answer is insufficient. It assumes that belief in conspiracy theories is a failure of intelligence, when it is more accurately understood as a response to a failure of institutions. Trust in governments, media organizations, financial systems, and public health authorities has declined sharply across the developed world over the past 50 years. This decline has not been driven by conspiracy theories. It has been driven by events, wars fought under false pretenses, financial crises caused by deregulation, pharmaceutical companies concealing drug side effects, intelligence agencies conducting domestic surveillance. The institutions that people were told to trust have, in numerous documented cases, behaved in ways that justified distrust. Conspiracy theories flourish not in a vacuum of information, but in a landscape where institutional credibility has already been damaged by the institutions themselves. The deeper appeal is psychological, and it is not a deficiency. It is a feature of how human minds process uncertainty. The alternative to the Illuminati conspiracy theory is not a clear, satisfying explanation of how the world works. The alternative is uncertainty, the acknowledgement that the institutions we depend on are imperfect, that the people who run them are fallible, and that outcomes are shaped by forces too complex for any single narrative to contain. For most people, uncertainty is more frightening than conspiracy. A world controlled by the Illuminati is a world that makes sense. Someone is in charge. There is a plan. The plan may be evil, but it is a plan. And a plan can, at least in theory, be resisted. Uncertainty offers no such comfort. The Illuminati conspiracy theory offers something that the real world does not: certainty. It provides a clear enemy, a clear explanation, and a clear role for the believer, the person who sees through the deception when everyone else is blind. It is a deeply human need for agency and meaning in circumstances that provide neither. To dismiss it as stupidity is to miss the point. The real Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt's 9-year experiment in Enlightenment philosophy, would be unrecognizable to anyone who encountered them through the conspiracy theory that bears their name. And that is, perhaps, the final irony. The organization that wanted to spread reason became the foundation for one of the most persistent expressions of unreason in modern history. Skull and Bones is a secret society at Yale University. It was founded in 1832, 47 years after the Bavarian Illuminati were dissolved, and it has no historical connection to Weishaupt's order. It is not a branch of the Illuminati. It is not an offshoot. It is a different organization with a different origin, a different purpose, and a different structure. But it is real, and it is secretive, and its membership list reads like a draft roster for the American establishment. The society inducts 15 seniors each year. Its headquarters, a windowless building on the Yale campus known as the Tomb, has no public entrance. The organization also owns Deer Island, a private retreat in upstate New York. Members are sworn to lifelong secrecy about the society's rituals and internal operations. Alumni include 3 presidents of the United States: William Howard Taft, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush, as well as Secretary of State John Kerry and multiple directors of the Central Intelligence Agency. These are not disputed facts. They are documented, verified, and in most cases publicly acknowledged by the individuals involved. Skull and Bones is a real secret society with real power, the practical kind, but they may not attribute it to any specific speaker. Conspiracy theorists cite Bilderberg as evidence that the Illuminati, or a modern equivalent, continue to operate. The logic follows a now familiar pattern. Powerful people meet in private, and therefore they must be coordinating a hidden agenda. The fact that the meeting is annual, that it includes the same kinds of people who would constitute a ruling elite, and that its proceedings are confidential, provides enough raw material for this interpretation to sustain itself indefinitely. But mapping Bilderberg onto the conspiracy narrative makes the organization less interesting, not more. The real concern about the Bilderberg Group is democratic accountability. When heads of state, central bank governors, and defense officials gather to discuss policy in a forum where no public record is kept, the question is whether elected officials should be discussing policy outside the view of the people who elected them. This is a legitimate question of governance, and it is entirely addressable through institutional reform, through transparency requirements, through disclosure rules, through the mechanisms that democracies already possess for holding their leaders accountable. The conspiracy theory does not address this question. It replaces it with a story about hidden masters and invisible control, a story that is more dramatic but entirely unactionable. You cannot reform the Illuminati. You can reform disclosure requirements. The conspiracy theory makes the fixable problem unfixable by translating it into myth. Every July, approximately 2,500 men gather at a 2,700-acre compound in the redwood forests of Northern California for a 2-week retreat. They are members and guests of the Bohemian Club, a private social organization founded in San Francisco in 1872. The membership has included US presidents, military commanders, and senior executives from the largest corporations in the world. The retreat is exclusive, all-male, and largely closed to public scrutiny. The event that draws the most attention is the cremation of care, an opening ceremony in which a symbolic effigy is burned before a 40-foot concrete owl. In 2000, the conspiracy broadcaster Alex Jones infiltrated the country, have a private space where they form bonds that influence decisions made in public, and that this arrangement operates entirely outside the structures of accountability that are supposed to govern the exercise of power. The pattern continues beyond these 3 cases. The Council on Foreign Relations, founded in 1921, is a US foreign policy think tank with an invitation-only membership that includes former presidents, secretaries of state, and senior intelligence officials. It publishes its membership list. It publishes its research. It is not a secret organization. It has been cited in New World Order conspiracy theories for decades. The Trilateral Commission, founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller, promotes cooperation between North America, Europe, and Asia through private policy discussions. Its membership is public. Its publications are freely available. It has been described as the Illuminati's modern face by conspiracy theorists who note the private nature of its deliberations and the prominence of its members. The World Economic Forum, founded in 1971 and best known for its annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, convenes heads of state, billionaires, and corporate executives to discuss global economic policy. Its sessions are frequently filmed. Its agenda is published in advance. It has become a central target for conspiracy theories about global governance, theories that describe Davos as the place where the world's real decisions are made. Each of these organizations is real. Each conducts private deliberations involving powerful people. None of them is the Illuminati. None has organizational roots in the Bavarian Order. None practices secret rituals or pursues a hidden ideology. They are policy forums, social clubs, and professional networks, institutions where influence operates through relationships rather than through conspiracies. But the conspiracy theories about them are not entirely fabricated from nothing. They are built on a real observation that the most consequential decisions affecting ordinary people's lives are often made in rooms that ordinary people cannot enter. The organizations on this list prove that powerful people do meet privately, do form networks that influence policy, and do operate with a degree of opacity that is difficult to reconcile with democratic principles. The conspiracy theory takes this real observation and converts it, strips it of nuance, attaches it to a narrative of total control, and presents it as evidence of a plan rather than a pattern. There is something the conspiracy theory gets right, and something it gets catastrophically wrong. What it gets right is the observation. Elite influence is real. It is not a fantasy, and it is not a paranoid projection. It is a documented, measurable feature of how modern democracies actually operate. Lobbying, the practice of paying professionals to influence legislation on behalf of private interests, is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States alone. Regulatory capture, the process by which the agencies created to regulate industries come to be controlled by those industries. The uncomfortable truth is that the world does not need a secret society to produce the outcomes that conspiracy theories attribute to the Illuminati. The outcomes are produced by systems, by incentive structures and legal frameworks operating in a world where money buys access and access shapes policy. There is no hidden hand. There is only the visible one, operating in plain sight, largely unchallenged, in part because the people who might challenge it are busy looking for a conspiracy that does not exist. The Bavarian Illuminati lasted 9 years. Everything about them, the founding, the structure, the infiltration, the suppression, the founder's long decline, has now been accounted for. The documents are public. The history is settled. And yet, the Illuminati is the most famous secret society in human history. The name appears on currency it had nothing to do with, in music videos filmed 230 years after its last meeting, in political accusations made by people who have never read a single page of its actual correspondence. The name has outlived the organization so completely that the two have become separate entities. The historical society buried in the archives, and the conspiracy theory circulating through every medium the modern world has produced. The question that remains, after everything, is not whether the Illuminati still exist. They do not. The question is why the idea of them cannot be killed. The answer has nothing to do with the Illuminati. It has to do with a problem that is older than any secret society and more permanent than any conspiracy theory. Human beings are pattern recognition machines operating in a world that is largely patternless. We evolved to detect agency, to assume that the rustling in the grass was caused by something with intentions, because the ancestors who made that assumption and were wrong lost nothing, while the ancestors who failed to make it and were right were occasionally eaten. We are the descendants of the ones who checked. We are built to see faces in the dark, to find plans behind events, to assume that when something important happens, someone important made it happen. Most of the time, no one did. Financial systems collapse because of accumulated structural fragility, not because a committee decided they should. Pandemics emerge from the intersection of ecology and chance. Wars begin through cascading miscalculations that no single actor intended. The world is not controlled. It is not managed. It is not even, in the meaningful sense of the word, organized. It is a system of enormous complexity, producing outcomes that no one designed and no one can fully predict. That is the terrifying part. The absence of the Illuminati. The possibility that the events that shape our lives, the ones that